When the clamor of the times, to quote Coolidge, becomes unsettled and ominous, it is good to turn to past times, to history, for wisdom and guidance. Usable history is one of the keys of the success of the Coolidge Foundation, especially among young people. Our programs have introduced the example of Calvin Coolidge and his times into today's radically different times. Doing so reminds us of the great traditions we are standing on and the good that can come from them. It has been our good fortune to have this evening's guest speaker, Jim Grant, as a participant in our programs over the years. His fortnightly financial journal, Grant's Interest Rate Observer. What? Hi. This great, The Observer examines money through the lens of history, from ancient to modern, rather than the macroeconomic algebraic mumbo-jumbo so beloved by today's Federal Reserve Board. For more than 40 years, Jim's journal has been the most perspicacious guide to money and finance on the planet. He is also the author of 5 books on the subject of finance. One of them, Mr. Market Miscalculates, collected his columns in the years preceding the financial market collapse of 2008. The Financial Times reviewed, "If Grant could see what was happening this clearly and warn of it in a well-circulated publication, how did the world's financial regulators fail to avert the crisis before it became deadly? And how did the rest of us continue to make the irrational investing decisions that make Mr. Market behave the way he does?" His most recent financial book, The Forgotten Depression, is Coolidge adjacent. It tells of the sharp downturn of 1920-21, from which the economy quickly recovered, free of the frenetic government interventions that decades later would turn another downturn into the Great Depression. Jim is also the author of 5 sensationally interesting biographies and political histories. 2 of them concern epic financial figures, Bernard Baruch and Walter Bagehot. The others concern political leaders, John Adams, Party of One; Mr. Speaker, The Life and Times of Thomas B. Reed, the man who broke the filibuster, unfortunately only in the House. His latest, the subject of this evening's symposium, is Friends Until the End, Edmund Burke and Charles Fox in the Age of Revolution. The book's narrative is filled with striking parallels and contrasts to today's politics. It tells of an alliance of a conservative and a liberal on behalf of overarching goals: to preserve legislative prerogatives against executive overreach, to separate commercial profit-seeking from the duties of governing. But it is nothing so tedious as a guidebook of lessons for today. It is a gripping account of 2 larger-than-life figures of 18th century Britain, told with verve and erudition. Whether our distinguished author this evening wants to emphasize the didactic or the historical, we will now discover. Please give a warm welcome to Jim Grant.
Thank you, Amity. Thank you, Coolidge, and thank you, Christopher. I was disappointed the introduction ended. Well, I only wish my friends Edmund, Burke, and Charles Fox could be with us this evening. You know, it's impossible. But I expect that you would love them as much as I have come to do. Fox, the unwashed, unchurched, mistress collecting, hard-drinking, Shakespeare spouting leader of the English Whig Party, and Burke, the clean-living, spellbinding, God-fearing author of the immortal Reflections on the Revolution in France. They were the greatest orators in an age ornamented by the beauty and power of its political speech. So they made common cause for 25 years, the two of them did, in their support of the rebellious American colonies, attacks on the British slave trade, defense of religious liberty, and attempts to shield Britain's public credit from the powerful, if almost comically misgoverned, East India Company. They joined forces to impeach Warren Hastings, governor of British India, for crimes against the Indian people in a trial that lasted for eight years. The French Revolution ended their political union and shattered their friendship. Burke denouncing it hewed to the right, and Fox revering it reciprocally moved to the left. So my book is the story of two intermingled, consequential lives in the context of these tumultuous and stirring times. It is, or is meant to be, a study of the possibilities for and the limits of friendship across the gulf of political ideology. You know, perhaps some of this is relatable today. So Burke and Fox, what an odd couple they made. It's quite extraordinary. You wonder what drew them together in the first place. Well, it wasn't a shared social position. Burke was the son of a middle-class Irish lawyer, and Fox, the scion of an English political family. Burke was 20 years older than Fox. They both lived in the second half, basically, of the 18th century. And Fox, who seemed to have not one religious bone, married late and then to a courtesan. And the doctors who performed his autopsy especially remarked on the damage to his overtaxed liver. Burke, a professed Christian who held that the established church was the glue of civil society, was a homebody and, as far as we know, a monogamist. What the two friends shared was a career in opposition. Now, this was a profitless business, and the members of Parliament were not paid. There were loaves and fishes aplenty for friends of the king and officers of the crown. But Burke occupied no governmental post higher than the lusterless post of paymaster of the forces. Well, it wasn't profitless until he got into it, and he reformed it so that he wouldn't get any money out of it. That's my Burke. Fox, who lived from bankruptcy to bankruptcy, briefly held ministerial office, but he, like Burke, spent most of his career opposing. Wrote Fox to Burke, "There is no man who hates the power of the crown more, or who has a worse opinion of the person to whom it belongs than I." That was Fox. Concerning their principal antagonist, the King of England. So George III detested Fox. He hated him in turn, as well he might, for Fox and the Prince of Wales, George's son, were boon companions. The prince held the unwanted distinction of owing even larger gambling debts than the dice-rolling and horse-playing parliamentarian. I might add here that my friends shared a reverse Midas touch. Fox, as I mentioned, was constantly in and out of bankruptcy. Did I say out? In. His father indulged him from childhood with money to spend on gambling and l'amour. And Burke, an intellectual intimate of Adam Smith, lived a different kind of life of financial desperation. Land poor, he paid more to maintain his Beaconsfield estate than he possibly could have earned by literary work, farming, or the occasional ill-conceived and ham-handedly conducted speculative venture. And many years after his death, Brooks's, the Whig Club in Mayfair, to which Fox and he belonged, were dunning his wife for unpaid dues. This is after his house burned down, you know. So where is that £5 and 6 pence? So you may wonder, especially you younger students here, what a man with a day job, say a fellow like me, sacrifices nights, weekends, and the 4th of July and Christmas Eve to undertake this project. I don't know. I can't remember. No, I did it most of all for the love of the language they spoke and wrote. It's music to me. And it wasn't just the two of them. Here is Lord North, who led Britain's government for a dozen consecutive years, extemporizing a reply to a motion to investigate the King's spending. So it's just one day in Parliament, the House of Commons, and Lord North is the Prime Minister, and here he is, just off the cuff, just telling the opposition where to go. So, quote, "It is exceedingly pleasant to find gentlemen who have themselves benefited by the munificence of the crown, and who are themselves hourly pocketing the public money, making so strict an examination into the disbursements of the King's spending, and weeping so tenderly over the oppression of their poor country. However, as I would at all times rather reason than rail, and as I am desirous of leaving the liberal field of invective wholly to the enemies of administration, I shall proceed at once to the reasons which induce me to oppose the present motion." Wow. Now there's your Brahms' third movement of the Third Symphony right there. So like Fox, North excelled in running debate. Burke's set-piece speeches, parts of which he too extemporized, can be read both for their ideas and the beauty of their language. In 1775, he wrote something called The Conciliation with America, a plea for peace and returning to good humor and good form. Stands as one of the seminal works of political thought of any age. And here is a taste of it. "All government," wrote Burke, "indeed every human benefit and enjoyment, every virtue and every prudent act is founded on compromise and barter. We balance inconveniences, we give and we take, we remit some rights that we may enjoy others, and we choose rather to be happy citizens than subtle disputants." Holy mackerel. Isn't that wonderful? But it does sound a little bit like a rhino, doesn't it? Yeah. Burke perhaps inspired more disciples in death than he did in life. Fox, 20 years Burke's junior, led his Foxites in a moment. No matter that he twice led his party out of office and into the wilderness, his friends' loyalty followed him there, and I dare say would have followed him to the gallows. Fox's funeral in 1806, privately organized and financed, was comparable in grandeur and solemnity to the state funeral of Lord Nelson the year before. Fox's friends and the descendants of those friends continued to meet on Fox's birthday every year until the last devotional dinner in 1907. And I'm told that after a long lapse, they're back at it again at Brooks's. So the political affiliation that Burke and Fox shared was that of the so-called Whig Party. The Whigs stood for government by the enlightened few, chiefly the landed aristocracy, that is, themselves. They supported religious tolerance and the independence of Parliament against the encroachments of the Crown. Also, as to the motto, the Tories' motto, Church and King, Fox wanted as little to do with either as possible. Burke favored both, though he and Fox were as one in imputing tyrannical motives to George III. So Fox was born a Whig, and Burke rather came to those colors through reason and personal loyalties. The social divide between them was unbridgeable. a fact that Burke accepted without envy. He likened such self-made men as himself to, quote, annual plants that perish with our season and leave no sort of traces behind us. Properly set above them in politics and society were the noble great oaks that shade a country and perpetuate their benefits from generation to generation. I pay no attention to the people, said the insolent young Fox, the future man of the people. It was a very different Fox who, during the French Revolution, raised the toast, "May ancient nobility of England ever think it their highest honor to support the rights of the people." So Burke and Fox moved easily together in the London intellectual and literary world. Oh, what a world it was. To shine in conversation meant matching Latin tag for Latin tag and one Shakespearean quotation for another. And presiding over literary London was the formidable lexicographer who, with the portraitist Sir Joshua Reynolds, founded the famous literary club in 1764. Here's what Samuel Johnson said about Burke. He said, quote, "His stream of mind is perpetual." Stream of mind. You wish you could have known him. I do indeed wish it. The novelist Frances Burney, who met Burke at one of Reynolds's dinners in 1782, decided that she was in love with him. She marveled at his sparkle. Quote, "Such spirit, such intelligence, so much energy when serious, so much pleasantry when sportive, so eloquent at argument, so exhilarating in trifling." Nor did it diminish the statesman to the author's eyes that he had read her second novel, Cecilia, from cover to cover, and had taken the trouble to write her a letter of almost rhapsodic admiration. Watching the two of them making eyes, Burney's father observed, they both wanted the same thing. Well, thorns in the sides of the Tories. Burke and Fox were fair game for the Tories newspapers. Political caricaturists rendered Burke as Don Quixote or as a thin, bespectacled priest in Beretta and Cossack with a partiality for whiskey and potatoes. I guess that's hate speech, right? An Irishman who supported Catholic emancipation was obviously a papist, let the facts to the contrary be what they may. Now, Burke said of this, of his being charged with being a Catholic, said, well, yeah, that's fine with me. He said, any branch of the Christian faith, I find I'd be in exceptionally good company, so yeah. So the same caricaturist had no need to take visual liberties with Fox. He really was swarthy, fat, ungroomed, and hairy. His one-time lover, the Duchess of Devonshire, affectionately called him the eyebrow. Yeah. So in 1783, Fox introduced a bill in the House of Commons to bring under government regulation the quasi-private company that monopolized English trade with India and ruled over millions of its inhabitants. That was, of course, NVIDIA. Nope, that was the East India Company. Just trying to find out if you're listening. Though financially unstable, the East India Company was politically powerful, and its parliamentary allies were certain to be lying in wait for the bold mover of the legislation. So anticipate their attack. Burke rose to defend his friend's intentions and his honor. Okay, so here was a passage that Burke spoke in Parliament, in the House of Commons, that was the proximate cause of my writing this book. These are the words that led me on this 4-year project. Okay. "He has put to hazard his ease," said Burke of his friend. "His security, his interest, his power, even his darling popularity, for the benefit of a people he has never seen. This is the road that all heroes have trod before him. He has traduced and abused for supposed motives. He will remember that obloquy is a necessary ingredient in the composition of all true glory. He will remember that it is not only in the Roman customs, but it is in the nature and constitution of things that calumny and abuse are essential parts of triumph. You'd write that book too, right? Read that. I'm glad I beat you to it. So, Burke could go on, and he exhausted the younger members of Parliament who had judged him to be rather a dated, out-of-date guy and over the hill. And Burke would go on and on. And at one time, it struck me that I could imagine a scene where, imagine Burke is a concert pianist. He's playing as a concert pianist, and it comes to the part where he is allowed to improvise and show off his virtuosity. And so 16 bars turns to 32 bars, and 5 minutes turns to 8 minutes, 10 minutes. And finally you see the orchestra drifting away, the bass players and the trombonists are making for the, and one by one, and the audience begins to file out, tiptoe out. And finally it's Burke playing his cadenza. And nobody else is there. So, but Fox himself his talents were as formidable. And when a visiting French politician disparaged him in the presence of William Pitt, the long-serving Tory Prime Minister, Pitt replied, "You have never seen the wizard within the magic circle." So the American Revolution was the first event over which they bonded, in which they allied themselves, and Burke famously said, "I do not know the method for drawing up an indictment upon a whole people." And Fox made the rounds of London wearing George Washington's colors, risking all sorts of insult, and not to mention charges of treason, I guess. And after the Battle of Long Island, in which George Washington got chased all over Long Island by the Brits, here is what Fox wrote to a Whig colleague in this very dispiriting hour, 1776. "Above all, my dear Lord," said Fox, "I hope that it will be a point of honor among us to support the American pretensions in adversity as much as we did in their prosperity, and that we will never desert those who have acted unsuccessfully upon Whig principles, while we continue to profess our admiration for those who succeeded in those principles in the year 1688. Yeah. Okay, so the impeachment of Warren Hastings, Governor General of East India, it's one of the most striking and amazing things. This is I think Amity said this to the readers of the National Review. Amity, I haven't seen your review. I hope you like the book. But she is meant to have said to the readers of the National Review that this is lawfare, or one species of it. So Warren Hastings was hounded by Burke and Fox and others for a trial that began with a speech by Burke that lasted 4 days. And over the long course of the trial, 1/3 of the Hastings jury pool, the members of the House of Florida, died. And when the time came to reach a verdict, scarcely more than 24 of the members who had been around enough to allow them in conscience to pass judgment as not guilty on all counts. So nearly everyone was heartily sick of it by then, Fox included. Though Burke himself never flagged. His reply to the summation arguments of the defense spanned 9 days. And Amity and I were on the phone, and she said, Burke is crazy and not crazy. Well, yeah, I guess there's something to that. A lot to that. Which brings us to the sad finale. The Friends' irrevocable split over the French Revolution. How much the greatest event it is that ever happened in the world, and how much the best. This is what Fox declared as the walls of the Bastille were scarcely finished falling. So Burke at length replied with reflections on the revolution in France, his great gift to the Western canon of thought. And to Fox, the revolution was nothing less than France's version of Britain's glorious revolution. To Burke, this monstrous tragedy was not about liberty, but nihilism, and about financial malpractice, too, financial malpractice. Burke's critique of the revolutionaries' monetary errors, for some of us, anticipate today's debate over the Federal Open Market Committee. So Burke and Fox each wondered if the other had lost his mind. Fox couldn't even bear to open the reflections of the Revolution in France. And in the House of Commons on May 6, 1791, Burke rose to condemn Fox's stand on France and to announce an end to their friendship. And Fox, according to a witness, burst into tears and lamentations at the loss of Burke's friendship and endeavored to make atonement, but in vain, and Burke wept too. The pair never reconciled. On his deathbed, Burke refused to see Fox, and in 1800, Fox refused to subscribe to a national memorial to Burke. If I were to say that I have quite forgiven it, it would be boasting of a magnanimity which I cannot feel, said Fox. Burke died in disappointment. What had his long years of opposition availed? What indeed? So Fox, with his leadership in outlawing the slave trade, could count on that one major legislative achievement at least. As for the rest, he would rather have been known, he said, for his amateur studies in Greek and Latin literature than for all his verbal assaults on the governments of Lord North and William Pitt. So each man arguably succeeded more in death than in life. Burke's writings form the intellectual core, of course, of modern conservatism, and Fox's ideals and oratory inspired generations of 19th century English liberals. As for me, I love them for who they were, for what they said, and for the way they said it. I do wish they had reconciled, but ideology sometimes comes between even the best of friends. So a long time ago, I was in a class in college, and the eminent historian of American diplomacy, Richard B. Morris, author of the recently published The Peacemakers, comes in to talk to the class, and I don't know the rest of my classmates, but I was starstruck. Here's a guy who wrote a real book between covers. And at the end of it, Professor Henry Graff asked if there were any questions, and what followed was the most awkward silence. And Richard Morris, Professor Morris, looked at us, and we looked at our shoes, and that was the end of it. I bring this up not to put myself for a moment in the shoes of that eminent scholar. I'm a journalistic interloper, but I only mention the episode to encourage you not to hold back with your questions. All right, I see a hand back here. Jos, yeah.
Great. So thank you for this book. I am wondering about extrapolating Burke and wondering how Burke would react to presidential authority in our contemporary times, especially as it comes to your other line of work, the Federal Reserve and interest rates.
Well, I thought no one would ever ask that question. So have you heard the name Stephen I. Moran? He was the newest member of the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve. And his other day job is he's the chairman of the President's Council on Economic Advisors, right? So he has one head, two hats. Most unorthodox. And he testified at, he wrote something in 2024. He said that what he said was it is a scandal and a crime that there is this revolving door between the executive branch of government and the Federal Reserve. right? Okay. So, and then he gets him in front of the Senate for his confirmation hearing. He is the epitome of the revolving door guy. He's the avatar. Right?
Not even revolving.
It's an open. And you had, I don't know, I had in mind, looking at this, I had in mind RFK Jr. Testifying in front of the Senate about Maha, and testifying he had an open bag of Cheetos in his hand. The most extraordinary spread, should we call it, use the words, between profession and action. So this is crazy. It's there's a lot of crazy things in Washington, but this is and as with so much that goes on with the president, and like him or not, I mean, you have to allow that he never covers up. He just doesn't. Want to speculate on crypto and yeah, go ahead. You're the president, etc. It was so. But anyway, this I think this is a most un-Burkean moment. Is what I'm trying to say. Another question or two, maybe. There has to be. Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your talk and your book. Could you, in the spirit of the question that was just asked, expand just a bit on Burke's criticism of the monetary policy of the French revolutionaries?
Yeah.
I've never heard that before. That's the
Yeah.
question.
Well, towards the end of Reflections, Burke is writing about what the sans culottes have been doing, how they've been, how have they been, these errors they've been making in public policy. And one of them is through the creation of a paper currency, and their designation of that currency as legal tender, meaning you have to accept it in payment of a debt. And he said, in contrast, this is 1793, I guess. He said, in contrast, anyway, in contrast, he said, in Britain, nobody has to accept anything but a piece of gold or silver. There is no legal tender. No one has to accept a note of the Bank of England, a promise to pay gold and silver, and his exact paragraph or line or two on this bears quoting, if I can find it. He said, in payment for a debt of 20 shillings, a creditor may refuse all the paper of the Bank of England. Nor is there among us a single security of any quality or nature whatsoever that is enforced by authority. How noble is that, right? It's a marketplace of choice. And this whole business about legal tender, we forget that it was a fraught issue in America from the dawn of the Republic until the Supreme Court unaccountably, kind of crazily reversed itself and gave us the legal tender laws. And then but Burke was a man who believed in voluntary exchange, including, maybe especially in regard to money. Yeah. Sir.
Yes, thank you. It's my understanding Mr. Burke suggested to George III that he didn't quite understand the American mindset, that we thought we were already Englishmen. Can you give us more detail on how he spoke with the king about the American situation?
Well, they rarely spoke. They did come to. They came to be not intellectual intimates, but they came to share a worldview in the French Revolution. The king was a great admirer of Reflections on the Revolution in France, and he and Burke could discuss that on intellectually almost equal terms. As to America, there was no conversation. Burke was not especially pro-American. He was liberty. He was anti-arbitrary tax. He was, for a time, he was the agent of the colony of New York. He was of the New York Assembly. He was paid to do that, and but still, he had no particular affection for America or Americans. He wanted them to be treated fairly, and was against the arbitrary taxation of the Americans, and certainly was against the punitive actions on the part of Lord George and the British military establishment towards the Americans. Yeah. Yes?
Thank you very much for your remarks. Extremely interesting.
Oh, you're
I
welcome.
was wondering, how was it that Burke distinguished between the American Revolution and the French Revolution, since the French Revolution had some aspirations to do what the Americans had done?
Well, that is the question is, how did Burke exactly distinguish between the revolutions in America and France? Seemingly similar as they were. And Burke's answer to that was that the French Revolution was about the destruction of liberty, and the destruction of the institutions of liberty, and the destruction of the church and of the nobility. These were all institutions that, in Burke's mind, were the foundations of a true liberty. And they were the institutions that, in his mind, were inseparable from the freedoms that the English-speaking peoples enjoyed. America, by then, accepted it. It was a republic by then. But as far as Britain's 1688 revolution, the Glorious Revolution was about Burke thought that one was an act of secession and the other was an act of destruction, basically. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes.
I'm sorry to hear that the friendship between Burke and Fox ended because they had different political views. Can you speak to any advice you might be able to give us about maintaining our friendships with our friends with different political views?
Yeah. No. That's a hard one. It takes two to unmake a friendship, and or actually it takes one. And Burke could be so pig-headed. He knew that everything in the world turned on the defeat of the French revolutionaries. He knew that Western civilization was in peril. And he knew, furthermore, that if he gave the public the merest intimation that he had changed his mind, that he was prepared to have in his circle of friends and professional helpmeets a man like Fox, it would suggest that it was okay to compromise on this life or death question. So it's a little bit, we hear some of this with respect to the extremes of political judgment and violence undertaken in this moment. I think the actors are perhaps not so high-minded as Burke was in his reasoning. But when everything is about life and death, violence is not only optional, it's obligatory, right? You can't, you want to kill me, I'll get the draw on you, right? So I think it would be helpful a little bit if people would lighten up somewhat. This is one of the things I loved in keeping these people company. I mean the whole cast of characters was just how funny they were sometimes, and the humor was often very dry. And so take, for example, this doesn't exactly answer your question, but I wanted to get this out here. So Charles married Mrs. Armistead, and there apparently was no Mr. Armistead. Yeah, that's true. Mrs. Armistead was a courtesan, a very accomplished woman of all sorts of. Anyway, they were secretly married in 1795 and didn't say a word about it until 1802. And this was when Fox and Mrs. Fox, still head over heels, traveled together to France to see Talleyrand. Right? And, quote, with whose wife, the former courtesan Catherine Grand, quote, Mrs. Fox had many interesting recollections to compare. Isn't that lovely? Yeah, so that answers your question about friendship. Anything else? We're going to break up and go drinking or something. What are we going to do? No? No? I don't know, Christopher. What do you think? This is almost getting to the point of
I think it's time for book signing and personal conversations.
Okay, good call.
Jim,
Thank you.
Thank you for a lovely.